Let's jump into a function represented by a formula. And I picked a linear formula since that's what we're in the middle of working on. And we'll continue a little bit into more of the details of function notation and linear functions after this as well. So for this example, I've defined function f. Remember, that's just the name of your function. So function f inputs an x value and outputs 2 minus 3 times x. And I think the number one thing here is that you look at that and you see that definition and you take it as that. This is the rule that you will always follow in this problem whenever you see f referenced. So just to be really clear, f of x just replaces your y. So if we wrote y equals 2 minus 3x, that's really the same thing. We just get this power of being able to refer back to function f versus function g. And there are just some things we can express more clearly using this function notation. So we want to get really comfortable with it. Okay, so again, our rule here is whatever you input, you multiply it by 3 and you subtract that from 2. So those are going to be our steps no matter what. Multiply by 3, subtract from 2. So we're just going to dive right in and go for this. Number 1, we're supposed to find f of 1. So this says take a 1, input it into f of x. So f of x will follow its usual rule. We're going to multiply by 3 and subtract that from 2. So 2 minus 3 times our input. That's always the rule. If we plug something into f, we do 2 minus 3 times our input, which from here becomes arithmetic. So 2 minus 3 is -1. And that is our output. And if I ask you what is f of 1, that is your entire answer. You don't need to give me a point. You don't need to give me anything else. But I do want to clarify here that we do now know a point. So even though the answer to this question is just -1, I want to point out that this means that 1, -1 is on the graph of function f. We input 1, that's like our x value. We output -1, that's always like our y value. So we do know a point on the graph, but the answer to the question, what is f of 1, will just be -1. Okay, let's try f of -2, and feel free to pause and run through a few of these and then come back and just check and make sure you're on track. We are going to get back 2 minus 3 times -2. Which is 2 plus 6, or 8. Again, we do now know that the graph of function f goes through the point -2, 8. So this is all powerful. I want you to recognize that. But I also want you to be very clear that f of -2, the question is, what is the y value when x is -2? So don't give me both x and y, just give me y. Okay, and then we can step this up a little bit. We don't just have to plug in numbers. We could plug in symbols. We can plug in words. So what we'll see a lot is plugging in variables. If I ask you for f of w, if I plug w into function f, I should get back 2 minus 3 times w. And no simplification is needed there. That's a perfectly good answer. We don't need to go further with that. So it's okay to have an expression as your answer, not just a numerical value. Okay, so this is where it sometimes gets a little tricky for people. I think people get a little bit too attached to the x in the original function definition. So let me just go back up there and say that that is just a dummy variable. It's just a blank space that you're going to fill in. So it doesn't matter if we're plugging now 5x in where there was an x before. Don't let that tangle you. This just means follow the function rule with the input 5x. And the function rule is take 2 minus 3 times your input. So 2 minus 3 times 5x, which is 2 minus 15x. And again, that's an excellent answer. If you're plugging in something with a variable, you're going to get back something with a variable. You're going to get back an expression. So no need to try and go any further with that. That's great just as it is. And then last example on the inputting. The addition can sometimes make it trickier, but just like before, we're just going to follow the function rule. We'll take 2 minus 3 times 5 plus x. And we'll be a little careful with our simplifying. You should simplify these answers. So 2 minus 15 minus 3x when we distribute. Make sure that negative sign distributes through. That's a really common error. And then I can do a little bit better. I can combine the 2 minus 15. So that's negative 13 minus 3x. And that is, again, a perfectly good answer and expression. And the reason I'm making such a big deal about this being a good answer, negative 13 minus 3x, is because of what we're going to do next. We don't just plug things into functions. Sometimes we know the output of a function and we want to solve to figure out what the input was. So that's what we're going to do in the next two parts. So for this top one, we want to solve f of x equals 1. So first, you can kind of look at the left-hand side as its own problem. We're inputting x into our function, so the function rule says that we'll get back 2 minus 3x. Or you can just look back at your rule and take it really literally. F of x is the same as 2 minus 3x. So we're replacing f of x with 2 minus 3x. And we're saying we know that the output we got was 1. What input would we start with? And this makes us a fairly nice simple linear equation. So we can subtract 2 from both sides, which will leave me with just the negative 3x on the left, and it will leave me with a negative 1 on the right. And then we can divide both sides by negative 3, and we'll get negative 1 divided by negative 3, or positive 1/3. So the wording here should be kind of a clue. Solve, you're going to be looking for a solution. And this isn't always really super clear to people going into or even sometimes coming out of an algebra class. There's simplify and there's solve. In this case, I guess I used the word find because some of these we were just plugging in, but we talked about find and simplify. Simplify means you have some sort of expression and you want to write it in the simplest form that you can. So doing things like multiplying the negative 3 by the 5x, distributing, combining some like terms, those are all simplify things. You're just trying to organize things a little bit and make them look simpler. Solve is a very different idea. Solve means that you have a full it's like having a full sentence. You have a full statement here. 2 minus 3x is equal to 1. And that statement can either be true or false. And when we solve, we're using very careful properties to rearrange this until we can see clearly what the x value should be. So we're trying to make sure we don't mess up the equality here, but we can absolutely move things from side to side and do a little bit of arithmetic along the way. So over on the left-hand side, we're trying to preserve the value of the expression, not change its value, just make it look a little nicer. On the right-hand side, we're trying to find specific values to make a statement true. Okay, just one more of these after all that rambling. I would like to solve f of x equals 5x. This is particularly tricky, and I think that that's really just because people look at this and they say, what am I supposed to solve? This is just defining a function. But it's not. We already defined the function, and that's where I make such a big deal about you've got to take this really to heart and say, okay, this is my rule. So here, it's really just like the problem we did up above. F of x, if we plug x into our function, we get 2 minus 3 times x. And we want to set that equal to 5x. We know our output was 5 times x. And we want to solve again. So it's still just setting up an equation and look for that keyword solve. That's what tells you you shouldn't stop until you have x equals. So here I'll add 3x to both sides, giving me 2 equals 8x. And then I can divide both sides by 8. And I get x equals, and I'm going to reduce that a little bit. I can divide a 2 out of the top and the bottom, leaving me with 1/4, and that's a beautiful final answer. So absolutely, x equals is an appropriate answer to the right-hand two problems. On the left-hand side, we're not being asked to solve anything. Our answer should not be an x equals. It should be a numerical value or an expression. All right, thanks for watching.